Good evening. Welcome. We're so glad you're here. My name is Lauren Lucas, and Clay asked if I would sing a few songs to just kind of set the mood, set the context for the evening. And I think you're going to know these two songs, so I invite you to sing along with me if you'd like. And then we'll start our program. I hate to see you cry, laying there in that position. There's things you need to hear, so turn off your tears and listen. Pain throws your heart to the ground. Love turns the whole thing around. No, it won't all go the way it should, but I know the heart of life is good. You know there's nothing new. Bad news never had good timing. But then the circle of your friends will defend the silver lining. Pain throws your heart to the ground. Love turns the whole thing around. No, it ain't all go the way it should, but I know of life is good. Pain throws your heart to the ground. Love turns the whole thing around. Fear is a friend who's misunderstood, but I know the heart of life is good. I know good. Thank you. Just got one more for you. And then we'll get on with our show. I love you, Lord, for your mercy never fails me. All my days I've been held in your hands. From the moment that I wake up until I lay my head, I will sing of the goodness of God. All my life you have been faithful. So good. With every breath that I am able, I will sing of the goodness of God. I love your voice. You have led me through the fire and darkest nights. You were close like no other. I've known you as a father. I've known you as a friend. And I have lived in the goodness of God. Feel free to sing along. And all my life you have been faithful. will sing of the goodness of God. Your goodness is running after, it's running after me. Your goodness is running after, it's running after me. With my life laid down, I surrender now. I give you everything. Your goodness is running after, it's running after me. And all my life you have been faithful. And all my life you have been so good. With every breath that I am able, I will sing of the goodness of God. All my life you have been faithful. Oh yes you have. And all my life you have been so good. With every breath that I am able, I will sing of the goodness of God. I will sing of the goodness of God. Mary Meacham to come and introduce her father, and we'll begin the event.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Mary Meacham, and I'm a Nashville native, a junior at Vanderbilt University, and a 3-time intern with Voices for a Safer Tennessee. On behalf of Safer Tennessee, a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization with nearly 30,000 coalition members across all 95 counties in Tennessee, we would like to welcome you to this conversation tonight between Woodmont's own Dr. Clay Stauffer and my father, John Meacham. For those of you who don't know about the work of Voices for a Safer Tennessee, we are working to build safer, healthier communities across our state by reducing preventable firearm tragedies. Tonight's program is guided by a central question that feels pressing to many of us today. Are we living in unprecedented political times? And if so, how can people of faith come together to play a meaningful role in fostering civil and respectful conversations? We hope tonight's conversation offers perspective, hope, and a renewed sense of what is possible when people of faith come together to have these conversations. I'm now pleased to introduce our speakers tonight. Dr. Clay Stauffer is a 4th-generation Disciples of Christ minister. He holds degrees from Texas Christian University, Princeton Theological Seminary, and the University of the South, where his doctoral work explored faith and politics in a polarized world. He is also a contributor to The Tennessean, a Vanderbilt adjunct professor, and the author of several books, including his newest, What the World Needs Now: Virtue and Character in an Age of Chaos. And John Meacham, my father, is a historian, author, and Vanderbilt professor. He holds the Carolyn T. and Robert M. Rogers Chair in the American Presidency from Vanderbilt University, and it currently serves as the canon historian of the Washington, D.C. National Cathedral. A Pulitzer Prize-winning biographer and contributing editor at Time, he writes and speaks widely on history, politics, and faith. A lifelong Tennessean, he began his career at the Chattanooga Times and now lives here in Nashville with his family. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Clay Stauffer and John Meacham.
Well, good evening and welcome to Woodmont Christian Church. This is a joint event tonight between Woodmont and Stauffer, Tennessee. And so it's a joy to welcome you here. You pack a crowd. Did you know that?
I want to talk about the introduction. I didn't detect enough fulsome praise, did you?
Could have been a little bit longer.
It could have been a little longer. It could have been a little longer. And I do want to, what I did remember in Mary's speech was that it took Clay a while, educationally, to get to the Holy Mountain, which is, Sewanee is best understood as a combination of Downton Abbey and Deliverance. So Princeton, but then you had to come and actually get some real learning.
Third time's a charm, right?
I love that.
Third degree is a charm.
I love that. Well, you know, that's a Trinitarian joke, and I like that because here we are in a kind of, you know, we're going to talk about your denomination.
Here comes the Episcopalian. He's about to look down on our church.
We just think it's sweet that y'all are trying.
I know, that's right. I told him back, I said, we're doing well. We're doing really well, you know?
And we're not, so yeah.
We're going to get you here on a Sunday morning for a sermon. Look at this.
Yeah, it's going to be great. It's going to be great. That'll drive them out. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you for being here, John. What John doesn't know is this is also a capital campaign gathering tonight, so I'm glad that you're here.
How could you build anything else? I drive by here, and it's like Stauffer as, you know, annexing and annexing.
Well, we're working on it.
All right.
I do want to welcome you. I'm glad you're here. Welcome to those that are on the live stream. Welcome if you're in the gathering hall. And John, welcome to you.
Thank you.
We are glad that you're here.
Thank you.
You are a highly respected and renowned presidential historian.
It's like being described as the best restaurant in a hospital.
That's right.
Yeah. You want to win, but it's not that hard.
So you know history very well. Are we living in unprecedented times? Would you say that the political violence that we see today, is it on the rise? How do you compare it to eras past, 1960s, post-Reconstruction?
Yeah.
How would you analyze that?
Couple of different questions there. Are we living in unprecedented times? Yes. And that's against my business model to say, so you can definitely believe it. There are perennial human and political forces that are recognizable. What is unique is the particular marbled combination of these forces and, to shift metaphors, the fuel those forces are supplying to a particular partisan movement within the country. And so, since we're in a church, I can confess, for the first 6 years or so from 2015 until about January of 2021, I thought that President Trump, and I insist on calling him President Trump because there was this creature for 4 years in right-wing media named Biden. Remember, they said Biden did this and Biden did that. Well, no, he was the president of the United States. So whether you agree or disagree, and I have a feeling if you're here, I know where you stand, he is, in fact, the president and deserves that honorific. I thought President Trump was a difference of degree, not of kind, that he was the fullest manifestation of a lot of the forces that you and I have studied and written about. Nativism, isolationism, a kind of tactical indecency and a strategic lack of dignity to appeal to a certain as it turns out, dispositive number of American voters. 35% of this country is always kind of crazy. That's a technical, historical, and theological term. But I use the number advisedly because that's the percentage of Americans who still supported Joe McCarthy after he fell from power. In 1955, Gallup, working for the Washington Post, polled the country, and 35% of the country still approved of what Joe McCarthy had been doing. 35% is also the number that never approved of President Eisenhower's deployment of troops to Little Rock to enforce the Brown decision. So it's an interesting, the number recurs. The 35% of the country is not part of the unprecedented. That's precedented. The comes, and I say this quite advisedly, in the city and county in which we sit. The is added to the precedented because of the 14.9 to 15% of American voters who know better but have chosen for various appetites, ambitions, reflexive partisanship to go along with the 35. So there's some hope in this, if you will. We don't have to reach 70% of the country. There's about 15%. I sometimes call them Peter Millar Republicans. Those of you who know that know how perfect an image that is. These are golf club people. These are people who didn't want Secretary Clinton picking judges. They didn't want higher taxes. They didn't want this or that. And so they thought, well, how bad can it be? Ask the East Wing. So I think it is the combination, and I'm a biographer, so my bias is toward the human dimension here. You had these extraordinary forces. President Trump, who is arguably, not even arguably, inarguably, one of the most vital American political figures in 250 years, and no American president. We do ourselves no favors by diminishing the president. We do ourselves no favors. We should see him for what he is. We should understand the basis of the support. We have to be what we say we want others to be, which is if somebody you fundamentally disagree with does something right, intellectual honesty, and I would argue a kind of moral grace, requires us to say so. The hostage deal the other day with Israel and Gaza, I was on Morning Joe, I guess, and I said, intellectual honesty requires me to say that if you call them, if the facts warrant praise for someone you don't agree with on anything else, you have to do it.
That was a big deal.
Fox wrote 3 stories about it. They had not a lot going on about it, that I said that. It was a little weird. I'm also the guy that Tucker described Michael Beschloss, Doris Goodwin, and I as 3 of the dumbest people in America not long ago. And we may be, but I don't think Tucker knows that. So I think President Trump is a formidable figure. No, of the American presidents who preceded him, none of them ever had the grip on the mind share of this country that he has. This is the age of Trump. People who do what I do, if we can continue to do it, will be writing about him, to use the phrase of Winston Churchill's, as long as the English language is spoken in any corner of the globe. So that's the backdrop. The question about political violence as a comparative matter. And political violence is one of these terms that we have to be, I think, it helps us to define it, right? So political violence, roughly understood, is, well, let me ask you how you define it first.
Political violence.
Yeah.
There's a lot of different ways to define it, but I think we have seen it escalate where dangerous rhetoric, social media, which I want to get into a little bit, and the role that that's played, leads to brainwashing and ultimately people act on the words. So let me ask you this, because I want to stick with that.
Yeah.
September, there was an event in this country that got a lot of attention. Charlie Kirk was murdered while speaking in Utah. I was on a trip with some friends in Colorado. I got a text message that said, Charlie Kirk has been shot. And I responded, is he alive? Is he okay? And somebody said, I saw it online. There's no way that he survived that. That is one of the more recent examples of political violence. And I think that there are lots of examples that we could give. Ezra Klein in the New York Times wrote an op-ed after Kirk's death that said Charlie Kirk was practicing politics the right way. This was the title of the op-ed. Mm-hmm. Whether you agreed with Charlie Kirk, he was out on college campuses. He was having dialogues. He often drew young people that disagreed with him, and he would engage them on the topic. This was an example of political violence, and it impacted our country massively. Would you say that Kirk was an example of somebody trying to have dialogue and free speech with the younger generation? Do we see other examples like that? And what is the impact of that assassination on people's willingness to go to places like where you and I teach and have those conversations?
Sure. So, a couple of things. The assassination of Charlie Kirk, and I think it qualifies. It was a crime motivated to advance. This is how I define it. Political violence is violence undertaken to advance a political or identity-driven agenda. So it's also cultural, right? There's also cultural violence here because politics is, the root of the word politics is city. The ancients understood city as a group, a gathering of people. It's like the origin of the word religion is to tie back together. Religare was if you came to synagogue, if you came to temple, if you came to church, you were tying yourself back together because of the inevitability of a fallen world to pull us apart. So the classic examples of political violence would be the assassination of President Kennedy, the assassination of President Lincoln, which had an unfathomable impact on who we are now. Because to lose him at Ford's Theater in that moment had a discernible counterfactual impact. Not least because, and we can say this in Tennessee, the man who succeeded Abraham Lincoln as president, Andrew Johnson, really kind of disproves Darwin, right? It was not progress. Andrew Johnson issued the most racist state paper in American history, in which he said that black people are incapable of self-government, in a State of the Union message in 1867. So, go Rocky Top. Lincoln starts there. One of the tragedies of Ford's Theater, which was repeated at Daley Plaza in Dallas on Friday, November 22nd, 1963, was that President Kennedy and President Lincoln were both self-evidently growing in office. They were learning how to do the job better. And that is incredibly difficult. I know enough about this office. I've been blessed in my career to know presidents both when they've been in office, mostly when they've been out. But if you don't get into that office with your intellectual and emotional capital accounts overflowing, there's no chance to replenish them. It's just an energy suck, unlike any other. And the fact that Lincoln, the fact that Kennedy was learning and getting better compounds the human tragedy of those two things. Now, that was it. So what was the political motive? The political motive of John Wilkes Booth. John Wilkes Booth was a Knight of the Golden Circle. Who here knows the Knights of the Golden Circle? Oh, one, yeah. I see you at Dorks Anonymous. I know we're not supposed to out each other, but you're doing great on step 4.
You guys are tight, aren't you?
We are tight.
Right.
He's my sponsor. The Golden Circle, this is important because there's also a Tennessee connection. The Knights of the Golden Circle was a paramilitary group that sought to build a slave-based empire. The center of the circle was Havana. 4 presidential administrations heading into Lincoln's had tried to take over Cuba. They were going to have a political capital in Montgomery or Richmond. They were going to break away from the traditional American Union. And the Golden Circle was going to be a slave-based empire that included the Gulf of Mexico and took in some of Central and Latin America, swept back around, and it would become the central source of raw materials for the world. And it was going to be a race-based, like the Confederacy, which Andrew Stevens, the vice president of the Confederacy, congressman from Georgia, said, the Confederate States of America are founded on the great philosophical truth that the black man is not equal to the white man. That's what he said. So the Golden Circle had ranks of knights, not unlike a later organization, had a fundraising operation, ran paramilitary operations. It was part of what was also called the filibuster movement. William Walker, Nashville guy, the gray-eyed man of destiny, launched a filibuster. The original meaning of filibuster wasn't what it is now in the Senate. It was a privately financed military attack on a sovereign country to take it under private hands. Filibuster in Spanish means pirate. William Walker raised an army, goes to Nicaragua in 1857, takes over Nicaragua, which had abolished slavery, reinstitutes slavery, and is set up to be part of the Golden Circle. John Wilkes Booth was a member of that movement. The assassination of Abraham Lincoln was to end the slow, painful, tragic work after emancipation to seek an egalitarian, not simply a non-slave, but an egalitarian. One could be an emancipationist and not be an egalitarian. And Lincoln had been an emancipationist and was moving toward egalitarianism. Hadn't quite gotten there, I think he would have. One of the reasons Booth pulled the trigger when he did is he heard Lincoln give a speech on April 9th at the White House. He was killed on April 14th, Good Friday. Most of America learned about it at church on Easter in 1865. The speech at the White House on the 9th was in favor of black suffrage in Louisiana. And Booth was both at the second inaugural, we have a picture of him, and was at that speech, and he said, "This means citizenship, I'm gonna put him through." And 4 days later, he was dead. So those are two big things, right? Booth wanted to stop that. He killed the man he thought could do it. Oswald's complicated, but wanted to, left wing, all sorts of forces there. What's clearer, obviously, is what happened both on Friday, April 4th, 1968, and then June 6th, 1968. Outside room 306 of the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, Tennessee, when Dr. King is shot to death. He fell back in a cross. The Sunday before, he was killed on a Friday. He was there because of James Lawson. He was in Memphis. Dr. Lawson had gone over to be the pastor of a church there. He was running the sanitation worker strike. We just lost Reverend Lawson last year. One of the most important Americans not enough people know.
Who was kicked out of Vanderbilt Divinity School at one point.
And there is now a James H. Lawson professor. There is hope. There is hope. He always said that. He looked like what I think God is going to look like. Besides you, of course.
Right.
But, so, Dr. King was killed. This sermon he preached the Sunday before was at the Washington National Cathedral. In it, he offered one of the best definitions of democracy I've ever heard, which he said, "I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be. And you can never be what you ought to be until I am what I ought to be. That's the way God's universe is made. That's the way it is structured. You lend a hand because you want, in the expectation that you might need a hand." He's killed 4 days later. Senator Kennedy is killed 6 weeks after that. Another form of political violence, the Chicago Democratic National Convention descends into chaos and violence in July. And then George Wallace, who wins 13.5% of the popular vote and carried 5 states on that election day in 1968, he's also shot some years later. So that was an era of political, of violence against explicitly political figures. There's also political violence against institutions, January 6th. There's also political violence against the most unknown sorts of victims, but those who are killed because of their innate characteristics. Emmett Till is a victim of political violence. What Charlie Kirk tragically and worrisomely represents is a widening of the field of fire. Here is someone who was an advocate, was I guess we call them now influencers, almost a commentator a little bit. And I was struck, when it happened, actually Mary told me about it, which tells you something about his impact, right? This happened to a couple of other
he was connecting with the younger generations.
Yeah.
He was effective.
Yeah, and I was busy. I was giving one of my speeches I'm on an assisted living facility tour.
Be careful what you offer tonight.
I know. I'm very popular between Murder, She Wrote and Jeopardy. They slot me in. So I was there when the phone started going. And so that's a generational thing, right? And it means that other kinds of figures in the public square are now targets.
How would you respond to this? I've heard a lot of people say 2 assassination attempts on President Trump.
Absolutely.
You have the Charlie Kirk situation. How would you respond when people say, John, we can look back over history and political violence has gone both ways, But I've heard plenty of people say recently that they feel like it's coming from the left. What is the response to that?
Yeah, statistically, except for and it's like 1 or 2 or 5, there's a recent number that the organizations that follow this show there have been a few more of those. I don't know what that's based on, maybe Portland or something. Mm-hmm. I actually don't think it matters. Okay. Honestly, I think it's a bit of a distraction from the central point. I don't care who's pulling a trigger. I'd rather have them not do it. Right. Radical position, I know.
Right. Good thing to say in a church.
I'm trying. I need a lot of help. I think rhetoric matters, and part of my whole view about gun safety, and I say this, I have a couple of things I've said for 25 years now and have had zero impact. And one of them is, and I should just say, I'm a gun owner. The safest place to be a quail is near me when I have a gun. I make Elmer Fudd look like, you'd put him in Garden and Gun. I mean, so I'm not crazy. And look at me. Do I look like a crazy socialist? So it's not a cultural thing. My view is, if a safety measure, like the ones this organization advocates, can save a single life, a single one, it seems to me the Bible tells us something about the single lost sheep and the prodigal son. It matters. And maybe, probably, you'll never be able to prove it. It's about, I think that's why conversations about this are so important, is the reflexive, and Lord, I'm part of it. I'm a little bit better these days, but still, I go on television and I pop off about things that I shouldn't pop off about. Usually I try to find some angle, like the whiskey rebellion was interesting, so I try to, nobody knows what I'm talking about. So, but we have this machinery of perpetual conflict, and which we've always had, right? Mm-hmm. Newspapers have always been partisan. Less so in the middle of the 20th century for all kinds of reasons I won't bore you with, but we're back to that. And one of the things that's important to remember is always understand the culture and the incentives that create the problem you want to solve. So one of the things that is creating the problem you want to solve, which is when some terrible thing happens and everybody runs to their corner, and the gun advocate folks are saying, it was a crazy person, guns don't kill people, whatever all that stuff is. The thing is, the way that gets out, and again, I'm a little older, obviously, so I think in terms of cable television, but it's obviously true in social media, is something has to be put on the air. This is one where technology does drive division. Mm-hmm. We've been divided since Cain and Abel, right? I mean, that's not new. What's new is that people are profiting from staging, and it is staging, utterly predictable debates that will drive viewership, clicks, and ad revenue. No one gets up in New York at the cable stations, looks at the headlines and says, you know what, there's not much to talk about today, let's just show prison documentaries.
Right.
Right? They don't do that. So you have to have something. So you end up with, the great examples of this, and if you're here, you'll know what this is. Remember Obama's tan suit? Dumbest story in the history of a lot of dumb stories in our country. Why was that an issue? Because Fox didn't have anything else to talk about that day. I knew I'd hit the lowest moment. I've had 2 moments where I've known things will. This is 2? Just 2.
2, okay.
If you're going to be my pastor, you got to be a little more. I don't need you pushing. You're supposed to say, yes, my son. One was late in the 1990s. I found myself in New York sitting on a TV studio, and I actually said the following words: Geraldo, can I jump in here? That was a low moment. But it's good to mark them, right? It's like, I remember thinking going home, it's all up here. It's all up from here. The other was when a man that I know and used to like, this is a classic one of these about just, it doesn't matter what the issue is. You remember when the Bidens got a couple of dogs and they bit everybody?
Mm-hmm. Right.
I don't blame them. I saw a sort of a friend of mine on a conservative channel say, I just look at the Biden dogs and they just don't seem like a presidential pet. I'm like, just shut up. You don't have to say yes every time the booker calls. But that's what they do. And that's where the NRA is, and that's where, and so there's a machinery to this. And what I'm suggesting about the we save one, that's good, is that American history does tell us that, and the system was set up for this, that we can reach a higher ground. We can reach a more thoughtful policy if those who are pushing for that higher and more thoughtful policy do all they can not to fall prey to the fundamental human impulse to let the urgent and the emotional crowd out the important and the substantive. Don't let the urgent overwhelm the important.
I have a few more questions, and then we actually are going to take questions in just a little bit. If you have a question that you'd like to submit, we have note cards, and Claudia is, and they're going to pass them out. But Safer Tennessee was birthed after the Covenant tragedy here in Nashville.
Yes.
We actually held the first funeral for one of those children right here in the sanctuary. I have been the statewide chair of the advisory board for Safer Tennessee for coming up on 3 years. And the only way that I can do that as a pastor is that Safer Tennessee is a bipartisan or nonpartisan organization. We have Republicans and Democrats, we have liberals and conservatives, we have people who maybe don't even agree on the specific policies that we're trying to advocate for, but what we do agree on is we want to create a safer state. And our presence has grown, and I'm thankful to be a part of it. I've certainly taken criticism because of it. Here's my question. No other country in the civilized world has the kind of gun violence statistics that the United States has. And whenever anything happens, whether it was Sandy Hook or Covenant or take your pick, there's so many examples. Everybody seems to say, we can do better, we can do more. But very few people can agree on what that looks like. There's a lot of talk about what's the difference between a conversation over gun safety versus gun control. Some people want to lop everything into gun control. How do we have gun safety? How do we move forward when we continue to see these horrific events and you got people on both sides of the aisle who say we can do better, but the statistics are what they are?
It is the fundamental question. It's the question that, and I commend you for the work you've done, and I can imagine you do get some heat for it. So I genuinely commend your courage in doing it. It's hard to stand there and everybody wants you to be on their side.
That's right.
Right.
And they're always guessing where you are on everything.
Right.
Which if I can keep them guessing, that's good.
It's good. Yeah. It's good. It's good. So I think one of the things to step back is, and you all must have done this, is there an analogous story of reform in America that you all point to or try to model on?
That's a great question that I'm not prepared to answer. Yeah,
or is that why I'm here?
I would say that anything else that has ever taken root is from a grassroots kind of bottom up. Yes, it was born out of a tragedy, but more than that, it was born from people from multiple political persuasions who just wanted to see our country do better in this area, who believe what you said earlier, that if we can save one life or 10 or 100, that it's worth it. And since we are in the church, and this is also a Christian event, as far as I'm concerned, Jesus talked a lot about peace. And so what does it mean to be serious about peace? Well, I answer that with the work that I've done with Safer Tennessee. Does it mean that we have all the answers? Does it mean that everybody agrees with what we should push? The things that have been lifted up are background checks, which we have, but they're often not funded. Safe storage, which we've done a great job of educating on that, promoting that. And then the thing that we've talked about before is ERPO laws, because what we have is a crisis of mental health and access to firearms, and then we know what happens. So I can't answer your question about, I need to talk to some people and do the research on that, but it's amazing how it has grown in almost 3 years.
And the kinds of firearms, right? We're talking about weapons of war,
right?
Which have bled into the mainstream. So here's a little, as an analogy guy, the great reform movements in the United States have had a couple of common forces, strains, and one has always been religious faith. And I know for some on the left that they begin to think, oh, the Christian nationalists are coming for me. John Lewis would not have been on the Edmund Pettus Bridge if he had not been inspired by the gospel of Jesus. Martin Luther King would not have led the Montgomery bus boycott. Part of this is geography, is destiny. The reason they started to meet at Dexter Avenue Baptist Church is it was the most conveniently located church in Montgomery because everybody had to walk, and it was the shortest distance from downtown. They didn't want them walking a long way to have to get to the meeting. But Dr. King's appeal was driven by and grounded in both sacred and secular scripture. The March on Washington sermon endures, I think, not least because of the I Have a Dream, which is one of the great preacherly riffs of all time. But he took the Hebrew Bible, the New Testament, and the Declaration of Independence, and My Country 'Tis of Thee, and he blended them into this powerful appeal for us simply to live up to the things that we say we want to live up to. He wasn't asking for anything extra. He was asking for adherence.
This is what we say we're about.
This is what we say. And look, I'm a boringly heterosexual white Southern male Episcopalian, right? Things work out for me.
We can change the Episcopalian
in this case, I know you can, yeah. I know. Do you get like a? Never mind.
When Lauren was playing, John was like, "Is she singing hymns?" I said, "No, those are praise songs." He's like, "I like hymns. These are praise songs."
I can't, for me to leave the Episcopal Church at this point would be such a percentage drop that can't do it. Or as one of our favorite Episcopalians, George H.W. Bush would say, not gonna do it.
Not gonna do it.
But a guy of sort of my rough ethnic religious background wrote the most important sentence ever originally rendered in English, that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. We didn't have to lead the American experiment with a mission statement. Nobody else had. We chose to do it. It's a sentence that's changed more lives around the world and continues to do so. Now, I know that can seem hyperbolic. It's a little like the story about the Texas school board candidate who was against teaching Spanish in the public schools and said on the stump one day, if English was good enough for our Lord Jesus Christ, it's good enough for Texas.
Oh, goodness.
When George W. was governor of Texas, I told him that story. He said, that's pretty funny, asshole. So back to saving lives. Religion drove abolition. Religion drove the American Revolution in the beginning. Not alone. I'm not saying that. Don't raise your Howard Zinn with me. I got it. It drove the women's suffrage movement. It drove the progressive economic movement. It was about mercy and decency and dignity. If we are all created equal, if we are children of God, equal before the law and before the Almighty, then we deserve to be treated with fairness. We deserve to at least attempt to follow the commandment of love thy neighbor. Democracies don't work if you don't care about your neighbor. They just don't.
Right.
And I'm not asking you, this is Clay's job. Clay wants you to be good people. I don't care if you're good people. I just want you to act as if you are. You see the distinction? I want you, and I fail all the time, but democracies are about give and take. And since the third chapter of Genesis, we've preferred to take.
So last question, I'm going to go to Claudia. There has been a lot of research. I've done a lot of it. I've studied this. Christianity has been dividing itself along partisan and political lines for many years. One of the things, this is year 19 for me at Woodmont. One of the things that I have worked really hard to build here is what we call a purple church, where we have Republicans and Democrats, we have liberals and conservatives, how much red, how much blue, I don't know. But I am tired of people leading with politics. So at Woodmont, we have Trump supporters, we have people who don't want to talk about him. We have people all over the political gamut, and the theory is Christ should unite, but I'm committed to these kind of conversations because I believe they are important. And I believe that we need to have them. If we can't have them in the church, then I'm not sure where we can have them. But there is a concern, and Mary and I were emailing about this, that when you do this type of thing in the church, when you talk about politics, when you talk about gun safety, when you talk about whatever the topic, you're going to offend members and they will leave. And the point that I want to make is, let's have the conversation. You know how you feel. You know who you voted for and why. You know why you believe the way that you believe. But the data has shown that Christianity is dividing itself into suburban, red Bible churches and inner city blue social justice churches. And to me, that's a travesty, because the church should be a place where we're united, and then we work out the differences through dialogues and conversations. But I don't see that happening in many places. What are your thoughts on that?
No, and I think you're to be absolutely commended for trying, which is all we can do, right? Until what Faulkner called the last red and dying evening. I think that, for one thing, the black church in America has always been political. Why? Because it's the only institution where they could go. So we should sit with that for a second. And when white Christian nationalists say, well, the blacks do it, it's like, shut up. I mean, you're not supposed to say that in church, but there's a cultural, sociological reason for that. You're putting your finger on, again, to dork out, the distinction between prophetic and priestly religion, right? So in theology, roughly put, prophetic religion speaks out what's going on outside the doors. Priestly religion is about what happens here. And I'm a big believer that there's a place for both. And I think there are moments where the churchgoers, the faithful, need something intensely personal as they tend to the journey of their soul. And in those moments, you may not want to hear about the prophetic. But we are whole creatures, so there's a pretty good passage about this, right? There's a time to sow and a time to reap. There's a time to worry about outside, and there's a time to worry about yourself.
Right.
So that would be my unsought pastoral advice. I don't see how the work of this organization, I don't see how the broad work of preserving and strengthening the institutions of democracy, lowercase d, I don't see how it works without the role of the churches in America. I just don't. Because, first of all, nobody goes anywhere else, right? I mean, let's just think about it. We are an incredibly lonely country. Mm-hmm. The fact that y'all are here is amazing. And I hate to say it, but demographically, I could make some bewitched jokes and you would all get them. And Mary would not. So that tells you something, right? And so I believe we reached a more perfect union in 1964 and 65. We reached a more perfect union in 1969 with Title IX. We reached a more perfect union in 1920 with women's suffrage. We reached a more perfect union in the progressive era. We reached a more perfect union in 1989 and 1991 when the Berlin Wall fell and the Soviet Union collapsed. We reached a more perfect union on VE Day and VJ Day in the mid-1940s. We reached a more perfect union at Appomattox. We reached a more perfect union in the bloodshed at Gettysburg. We did it when Andrew Jackson stood down the South Carolinians in 1832. We did it in 1812 when we drove the British out. We did it in 1787 and 88 when we drafted and ratified the Constitution. And we did it in 1776 when we offered this mission statement. And in each of those moments, it was a close-run thing. So don't give up and don't despair, because nothing I just listed was a sure thing.
You wrote this in the American Gospel, which was one of your earlier books, published in 75, somewhere around there?
Oh, yeah.
I'm just kidding.
1875.
This is, and this was one of my favorite. The great good news about America, the American Gospel, if you will, is that religion shapes the life of the nation without strangling it, Belief in God is central in the country's experience, yet for the broad sinner, faith is a matter of choice, not coercion, and the legacy of the founding is that the sensible center holds. Can you still say that today?
I can about religious conviction. Right now, the sensible center is not holding in the broad political world, but I don't blame that on faith. That book was written in 2005, 2006.
I was joking about the 70s.
Were you? They all run together. By the way, my pledge is going down. So I think that I wrote that book at a time when there were a lot of sort of left-wing folks who wanted to totally secularize. There was that intelligent design debate. Remember, there was a big case in Pennsylvania, and a Nobel laureate had gotten up on the stand and said, you can't teach religion in schools because it would be like teaching fairy tales. And that same day, it was reported in the New York Times on paper. I'll explain that to you later, Mary, what a paper is. Inside, Pat Robertson, co-Macaulay alumnus of mine, we covered every base. We had Ted Turner and Pat Robertson. So if you were crazy, we got you covered. Pat Robertson issued a fatwa against Hugo Chavez from the 700 Club. It was like, you know, almost everyone I know is somewhere in between those two. And interestingly, and at this distance I can say this without it appearing, I hope, like a flex, as my children say, I got 4 phone calls after that book was published. And I think they wouldn't mind my revealing who they were. Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, Mitt Romney, and Joseph R. Biden. What do those 4 people have in common? They were running for president, trying to figure out what was the vernacular in which they could communicate the faith. And I still think everybody's struggling with it. Can I offer one last thought here?
Yes.
It's a stray thought. It's one of these things, I thought it was original, and then I found out somebody else had done it. But our old friend Lee Spruill and I used to talk about this. I worry sometimes, and the reason I think that a congregation like this is so important, and evenings like this are so important, I worry sometimes that partisanship is actually the new religion. Right? Think about it. You have your own congregants, you have your own ministers, your own holy books. You don't really mix with the other folks. You don't necessarily look beyond your own stained glass windows. And the difference is, religion, at least, rightly understood, is based on that commandment in Leviticus and in the New Testament to love your neighbor as yourself. Partisanship is based on the central commandment to beat your enemy. So if I'm right, that the sociology of our polarization is in part on a religious, has the same power as religion, it's driven by the opposite incentive. And I think that you have to name a problem often to know how to solve it. Mm-hmm. Yep. And I'd urge you to think about that.
Claudia Husky is a Woodmont deacon. She's the executive director of Safer Tennessee.
Husky. I didn't
Give her
know
a round
that.
of applause because she does a lot of good work. Claudia, I know we got a lot of questions, so lay some on us tonight.
We have some excellent questions here. I do have to tell you that Mary Meacham spoke to a group of very engaged high school students yesterday who could tell us much more about K-pop demon hunters and Taylor Swift than Bewitched. So she's working on bringing down the average age on this engagement.
That's called spiking the ball, Claudia.
It really is. It's true. It's true. All right, great questions. I'm going to combine some just so we can get to them. But as it comes to political violence, how does January 6th and the campaign to not certify the election, as well as recent engagement by ICE agents on some violent altercations with American citizens, including tear gas, how does that fit into political violence?
I think it's part of the widening field of fire. I think that the January 6th, the most violent January 6th insurrectionists, now pardoned, were acting in a classic mode of political violence. They were using force to achieve a political end and had been driven to this by one of the most insidious, if not the most, and this is a tricky claim to make, but I would submit that long-term, one of the most insidious events of the last 10 years has been the creation of the ethos of election denialism. That is new. I should have mentioned that when you said unprecedented. Andrew Jackson, Aaron Burr didn't say it in 1800. Andrew Jackson didn't say it in 1824. Stephen Douglas and John Breckinridge didn't say it in 1860. Richard Nixon didn't say it in 1960. Hubert Humphrey didn't say it in 1968. Gerald Ford didn't say it in 1976. These are like this close. And I'm so proud to say our neighbor and friend, Al Gore, didn't do it in 2000.
At one point, our highways were much more dangerous. We were losing a lot more lives to car accidents. We've used technology, lowered speed limits, taken safety measures, made cars safer. This is a question I think they really want to hear from Clay. Why could this same thing not be used around firearms? And can you talk a little bit about how, and maybe this is for John, how the Second Amendment relates to some of the complexities around that?
Yeah. So some of you remember not long after the Covenant tragedy, we actually had a forum in here. You can watch it online. It was Senator Bill Frist, myself, Alex Jehanger, who's a trauma surgeon at Vanderbilt, and has seen and has treated many of the children and adults who are the victims of gun violence. I've seen that firsthand. And that's actually one of the things we brought up that night, we've done all kinds of things to make the automobile safer. And we have laws that say you have to have your seatbelt on. My wife is always on me. I'm like, we're not going very far. She's like, I don't care, put it on. It's a good analogy. You can have the Second Amendment, and actually that was another question that we didn't get to, was the history of the Second Amendment. You're more well-versed to speak to that, but how do we continue to honor the Second Amendment, but recognize that there are some things we can do that just make sense, and that most people, a large majority of people support. And back to what we were saying earlier, it would save lives and it would keep our communities safer. So I actually think that's a great analogy. We brought it up that night. And here's something that's interesting. When you talk to, Tennessee is a super majority state, as you know. When you talk to certain lawmakers in their office one-on-one, they will say, I think that the things that you guys are advocating, I think that makes perfect sense. If I bring that up, they will replace me the next day.
Primary.
And then they will primary me, and then I will not get to come to Nashville and have my per diem and do this, it's a
Do they mention the per diem?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So, all that to say.
What if we volunteer to pay them the per diem?
Maybe we should do that. But there is a massive fear of being replaced. And we've seen that every time we've had these conversations with different people. And there's lots of people in this room that can give you firsthand accounts of that. Could you say a word about the Second Amendment? And not, I know you could talk for a long time, but the Second Amendment, when it was established, and how we think about the Second Amendment today.
It's a classic case of what in your world we call proof texting, right? Explain proof texting.
Proof texting is when you pull something out of the Bible, perhaps you take it out of context just to make your point, and people do it in all kinds of situations.
Right. So there's a lot of proof texting. And this is a fascinating history, right? I mean, there was, as you all know more than I do, so very quickly, the NRA was a gun safety thing. George H.W. Bush was a member of the NRA, life member of the NRA. Do y'all remember when he resigned? He resigned in 1995 when the NRA sent out a fundraising letter referring to ATF agents and Secret Service agents as jackbooted thugs. And George Herbert Walker Bush sat down and wrote a letter, typed it himself, because it looks kind of like a Unabomber letter. He wasn't a very good typist. But you knew it was from him, saying this language offends my sense of honor and love of country. And now, you could say he was a former president. He was out. But he also tried to stop imported assault weapons. And, for 1994 to 2004, we had a ban on assault weapons. It was part of what drove the beginnings of the supermajority in 1994. Jim Sasser, of blessed memory, would tell you that he thought it was his vote to ban assault weapons that beat him in 94.
Interesting.
So the other person who's been on my mind the past week, I'm sure, is our friend Liz Cheney, who did what we say we want politicians to do. Right? And, President Kennedy used to be asked, are you going to write a second volume of Profiles in Courage? He said, hell, I barely got through one. You'll notice it was short. There aren't that many. And the Second Amendment offers an elegant, parchment-covered, Charlton Heston-inflected, justification for an absolutist view that raises more money, creates a dedicated membership, and makes, and to me this is one of the besetting sins, makes the perfect the enemy of the good. I just want to save one person. You know what I mean? If we save one person, we will have done God's work. If we save many more people, it's exponential. And for all the political reasons, the polarization in the 70s and 80s, the distrust of government, distrust of institutions, I think it's this broader conversation. Democracies only work if there is a middle class that believes they're following the rule of law and obeying the rules will lead to a greater, more prosperous tomorrow. That's throughout history. The other thing it absolutely requires is delivering lives of decency and dignity. if American democracy cannot create the means of prosperity to make people believe that the trade-offs are worth it, then we end up in this autocratic place.
It strikes me that we had a presidential election last year where affordability was talked about. We had elections last week in New York and New Jersey and Virginia where affordability was talked about. And one of the reasons, Jonathan Sachs, he passed away in 2020. He actually, and I'll share this, and I want to try to get to some more of Claudia's. He had a wrote book called Morality, and I use it in my Vanderbilt classes.
Tell everybody who he was.
So Rabbi Jonathan Sachs was a British rabbi, Lord Jonathan Sachs. He was highly respected, highly regarded.
Tell us, he had one of the great titles ever. He was the Grand High Rabbi of the United Kingdom.
But he was talking about the decline in civility, and he gave 4 reasons why. Deepening individualism in the West, the phenomenon of the internet. We are living in the internet age. The uncivilizing impact of social media, and we haven't really gotten into that, but I talk about it a lot because it's a problem. But the last thing that he said, and this is what you made me think of this, is the economic division between the somewheres and the anywheres. It was based on a book, I think by a British author, that said we have a lot of people in our country, middle-class people, who have been squeezed out. And the issues of affordability are real. And we have seen those people vote for people in both parties if they think that they will be given a chance.
It's the fundamental question. And the cult of gun absolutism, the cult of fill in the issue absolutism, is often a manifestation of a broader concern that the country's not delivering. And I worry all the time about my children were born all after 2001. So I want you all to think for a second. So these are, it's 25. So this group is just, the first couple of classes have just graduated from college. So we're all history-minded, I think. And many of us, how many people here had grandparents or parents who fought in the Second World War? Okay. Korea. Vietnam. Okay, so who here would say their family was shaped in some way or was part of the civil rights movement of the 60s and 50s? Okay, all right, so a good number of hands. If you were born in any time after 2001, what is the story of the country? September 11th, the failure of intelligence over weapons of mass destruction, the Great Recession, a biographically interesting but historically indispositive Obama presidency, the rise of Donald Trump, COVID.
That was fun.
That was fun. January 6th, and the return of President Trump, and a Supreme Court that feels more political than it has since the 1850s. Okay. There's another thing. What do we expect from a generation about trusting us? What are the 3 places kids are supposed to feel safest?
Home, school.
Home, school, church.
Church.
We have 2 or 3 generations of children who have been told they need to practice being shot at in their classroom or in their church. Wow. I think that's more significant, arguably, than the duck and cover in the 50s. Because that at least felt a little remote. Nobody had a nuclear war to describe in the next county. So why would they trust us? It's why I think you all who raised your hands, you have a tangible connection to a moment in which this experiment in a more perfect union actually prevailed over the darkness for just a little while, which is all history is. They don't. And it's why it puts what Clay does. Clay is selling a product that the last time there was a fresh book was, 2,000 years ago, right? You're working off, you're not...
Did a couple translations along the way.
Yeah,
That's right.
I mean, you're not getting, a new Michael Connelly. So...
But that isn't fascinating. That is their arc of...
You have to tell a story.
That's right.
We have to tell the American story. The American story is not perfect. I mean, I look like Fred McMurray in My Three Sons. I'm not being hopelessly sentimental. I don't know if we make it. People say, oh, the institutions will survive. No, not necessarily. Because it's not about institutions, it's about people in the institutions. It's not about the courts, it's about judges. It's not about Congress, it's about people who have the primary issues Clay talked about. It's not about business, is it? We just learned that. It's about CEOs and boards. It's not about universities, it's about chancellors and presidents and boards. It's not about the law, it's about law firms who don't want to lose clients. This is a human undertaking, and the good news is you're here doing your part.
Claudia, we probably have time for one more, so pick a good one.
I think this is a good one for us to walk away from. How do we balance, as Paul in Philippians advises, to focus on the good with metabolizing current events? I don't watch the news, but not sure that's the answer. And we hear this question, I feel like, a lot. How do you stay informed and also optimistic?
You go first.
I'll go first. Thank you. So, interestingly enough, tonight we had our church Thanksgiving dinner downstairs, and Philippians is one of my favorite books in the Bible. It's short, it's worth reading.
For an honest preacher.
That's right. Saying that to John Meacham. But it's short, I'll say that again, and it is a book that I turn to around Thanksgiving time, largely because of the 4th chapter, where Paul writes those words. Part of the business that I am in, and the other ministers that are here, is we are in the business of keeping hope alive. We have to continue to let people know that there is hope, that they can press on, that no matter what happens to them in life, things they don't see coming, things that are tragedies, things that are awful, that they can get through them. As Frederick Buechner once said, somebody said, have you been born again? He said, let me tell you something, I've been born again and again and again. We have to keep going, and faith and hope are two sides of the same coin. So we have to live by those words in Philippians. But at the same time, we have to acknowledge the reality and the dangers that are present in our world. And too many people turn a blind eye, maybe because they're selfish, maybe because they're head in the sand, maybe because they're uninformed. But it is a constant struggle to face reality, but continue to press forward after you get knocked down, after life knocks you off your feet, and to say, tomorrow is a better day. You gave many great examples tonight from history of times when our country has been in a terrible place, and we got through, and we pressed on, but there were probably a lot of people in each of those situations that wondered if we're going to make it. So all I'm saying is we have to hold on to hope. I don't think you can have faith without hope or hope without faith, and we have to keep pushing forward. And the best part about it is we do it together. That's the difference between when people say, I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious. You can't be Christian by yourself. Spirituality is great. I'm all for deeper spirituality, but Christianity happens in community. And that's what is amazing, and that's also what makes it hard. But we do it together, we press forward.
no crown without the cross, right? The fundamental story of our religious tradition does not begin in glory. It begins in pain and blood and agony, a political action. Jesus was crucified because the Romans wanted to keep the lid on a chaotic Jerusalem. And Jesus was a political figure. Isn't it interesting? We don't bow down to an empty tomb. We bow down to the cross. We acknowledge the pain before we ever get to Easter. And I think that's one of the reasons in 2025 that all of us are sitting in this room, drawn here, a building built and endlessly expanding, by the story of a first century radical kingdom movement Jewish sect in Galilee. How did that one win? Do you know how many competing Messiah stories were there? And this one worked. I personally believe that it's because I think there's a historical basis to the resurrection. I think it happened. Because you wouldn't make it up if it had. It's so weird. Nobody was looking for a single, it wasn't, nobody had proof texted. Right? When the women came back and said he's not there, they said, they didn't believe him. So, not preaching, I just think that there is something about the long history of the West that enables us to endure the tragic in the hope that there is a redemptive hour. We live in years of tragedy for an hour of redemption. And closing with Reinhold Niebuhr is always good. Niebuhr once said, "The sad duty of politics is to establish justice in a sinful world." And you can only establish justice for a given period of time, and then it breaks apart, and you've got to do it all over again. That is our tragedy. It's our fate, but it's also our duty.
I want to say a prayer, and then I'll close with a few words. Loving God, thank you for this night. Thank you for this conversation. Thank you for the work of Safer Tennessee, and for the many lives that are impacted by both the work of the church, the work of this organization, and hopefully lives that were blessed tonight. Be with us as we move into the Thanksgiving season. This is our prayer in Christ's name. Amen. I want to thank you all for coming. We do have books. We have copies of John's book, American Gospel. There's another book there that if you need a copy of that, you can get to. It hasn't sold as well as this. But John Meacham, thank you for being here. And let's hear it for John Meacham.
Thank you. That's great.